I would like now to introduce today's presenters. Peter Duiveli is a practice director on the Information Technology Services team and focuses on sustainability and technology talent research. Peter helped incubate and currently leads Everett Group Sustainability Technology and Services practice, driving research on emerging sustainability enablement trends for buyers as well as providers. Yugal Joshi, partner, is Everest Group's business leader for technology services research and advisory memberships, which include multiple programs such as applications, cloud services, digital, and platforms. Nitish Mittal is a partner in the technology practice leading the firm's coverage of digital transformation and IT services in Europe, the United Kingdom, and Ireland. He covers technology areas across artificial intelligence, automation, cloud, interactive services, and the Internet of Things. And with that, I would like to turn things over to Nitish.
Thank you. And welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today on this exciting webinar where we'll all collectively look into our crystal balls and gaze into the future, but also reflect on the past. So we have an exciting lineup today, not just my colleagues on the call, but also the kind of things we'll talk about. But we'll talk about three things. First, we'll do a little bit of reflection and really think about what digital transformation, which is a decade old almost, has taught us, what's the progress that we've achieved, and reflect on that as a community, but also think about the challenges that clients and large enterprises face as they build on this decade of transformation. Then we'll do the crystal ball gazing, which is where we'll focus on what's coming up next over the next 10 years in terms of the innovation, technologies, governance, and services models around digital transformation. And then we'll go with our outlook and our prediction for the future. But Yugal, thanks for joining us today. As we think about the overall content and the messages today, what do you think is a more fundamental message which will echo throughout the discussion that we have today?
Hey, thanks, Nitish. I think I would have liked to give a soothing message to all of the listener, but what I do believe and what we see in our research, speaking with clients as well, things are becoming more complex from a business perspective, from a regulation point of view, availability of talent, availability of technology, so many of them. What is happening in the world today, as we see, irrespective of those past 2 years that have completely changed the world. As the businesses keep doing a lot more things which they weren't doing earlier. Earlier the businesses were built on what is called core competence. I think that era is over. Now businesses are trying to do many things. There's a lot of scrutiny on technology. And then we also see how the business environments are becoming so complex. So what we believe is going to happen is, businesses will try to simplify the way they work, but at the same time, they will go way beyond just becoming a profit engine. So that specific purpose for which they exist will get amplified. And this is the key message we would want to leave with the audience, that the digital transformation for the new world will become more complex. The businesses are going to become a lot more purpose-driven. And at the same time, even in this complexity, they are going to chase simplicity. Why don't we ask our audience? I think the poll is already up around, what was the key driver of digital transformation in the last 10 years? I think that will set up us well for the following round of conversations.
Yeah, and Yugal and Arpita, while people vote, and I can see these votes coming in thick and fast, any guesses on what's going to be the most popular option?
Yeah, I think that's the challenge that digital technologies created, and that's a part of complexity I was talking about. They became everything to everyone, and I believe that all of the above would be most likely the most popular option that enterprises wanted to do everything with digital transformation.
Yep. And you are right. We started on a good note where we do see that all of the above was rated by nearly 2/3 or 66% of all respondents, followed by how they think about building newer capabilities, followed closely by becoming a highly efficient organization, and then enhancing existing business capabilities. So you're right. I think it's an all-consuming task. Perfect. So as we move on, and this was a sense check in terms of just seeing where the audience is at and where all of you are thinking. We'll also have multiple opportunities for such interactions, but also as a reminder, you can start submitting questions using the Q&A tab that you see on your screens. We also have some pre-submitted questions that we'll get to in the last 10-15 minutes. But one of the things I wanted to start by talking about is the fact that contrary to popular perception, digital transformation is not new. In fact, if you do a quick digital transformation Google trend search, you'll see that the first instance of this being used in the mainstream was almost a decade back, using some of the work some providers were doing, but also publications like the Harvard Business Review. So, despite the fact that we think that digital transformation is something that the pandemic has accelerated by a number of years, or the last 4 or 5 years have brought upon us, it's been happening quietly but surely in the last decade. So the message we have really is that it's not new. We've had a lot of learnings in the last year and the last few years more specifically, but overall the whole digital transformation bandwagon has been going on for the last decade, and that tells us and puts us up very nicely in terms of where we're going next. As we move on, Arpita, I wonder, as you think about where we are in this ecosystem, where do you think we are as we think about the scale of digital transformation and how important digital transformation is? Are we picking up a few common themes from people taking this more seriously or differently than others?
Yeah, sure, Nitish. And as you rightly started, let's reflect a little on what has been happening in the past before we start predicting and talking about what we can expect in the next decade. And as you already mentioned, it was in the early 2010s when the world welcomed the next revolution in digitalization, which is the digital transformation. And as it happens with any emerging technology phenomenon, it started becoming a hype where enterprises were so eager to join the transformation bandwagon. What followed was a plethora of digital transformation experiments, pilots, and eventually post a mix of a few successful and a few failed initiatives. Digital transformation moved beyond from just being a one-off IT project to a more business-centric, strategic, organization-wide initiative. Enterprises were quick to understand that they would have to embrace the digital transformation to sustain their growth, particularly in the current era where agile startups and new age firms are very quick to disrupt the market. And this actually got a further boost in the wake of the pandemic when an organization's ability to adapt quickly to rapidly changing customer expectations became even more critical. So in the last decade we say digital transformation eventually found a place in the board level agenda. Companies started forming agile transformation teams. There was a lot of revamping of the organization structures, processes, your operating model that businesses started doing within their organizations to match up the blurring boundaries between the online and the offline experiences that they have for their stakeholders. So if we move on to the next slide, what digital transformation in the last decade has been all about, the kind of how can organizations build the right digital core to sustain digital transformation? How do you deal with your current legacy debt within your organization, the complex IT environment that you currently have? You modernize your digital core so that you're able to automate your processes better. You're able to collaborate better? Can it build the right ecosystem for your employees? How do you build the right channels for your customers? How do you build the right hybrid models for your employees, your partners, and all other stakeholders? And how do you build the right experiences for the customers? And this is a good segue to our next slide, which focuses on the key imperatives that the business reimagination process had for the enterprises. The first and foremost is about experience transformation, keeping customer at the center. How do enterprises build the right processes? How do they create the breakthrough innovation and initiatives to build the right experiences for their customers? How do you create new revenue models? How do you create new share gains? For example, the OTT platforms, digital only banks, usage-based insurance. The next aspect is about commercial innovation. How do you build new models, be the subscription models, this as a service models, the freemium models, which are more monetizable? And the third, last but not the least, is about ecosystem orchestration. As the world became digital, every company became a technology company. It's not about what you can do for your own customers. It's also about how you can leverage the entire ecosystem of players to create value for your customers and their customers as well. How do you collaborate with the ecosystem that you are playing in to build value for your customers and stakeholders?
And I think, what the point that Arpita made, and what we also saw earlier, that enterprises wanted to do everything with digital transformation, which resulted into an overload of technology. And unfortunately, this isn't going to change. I don't think, given the sheer number of technology companies out there, and they keep cropping up every day, the technology usage and adoption is of course going to go up. The proliferation is happening, and I think it will continue. The sprawl is there, be it on ecosystem partners around service providers, technology companies, startups, academia, which ties back to the point I earlier made, that things will become more complex. Now, the interesting thing is, how should an enterprise moving in the next decade to the next 10 years is going to bring all of these things together to actually create value for its ecosystem? Ritesh, so I think you work something on these lines, where you analyze a lot of companies trying to do something very cool around it. Care to share something on that?
Absolutely. So Yugal, I think that's a great point. And if I link it back to what Arpita was mentioning earlier around those three business models, we believe that as you think about the next decade, using all the learnings from the last decade and what's going on right now, enterprises will need to combine these three muscles or levers, in fact, to be able to reimagine their businesses. And we believe the three are going to be led by digital transformation. But let's talk a little bit about each one of them. So the first thing is just a different way to think about how they monetize assets. Now, assets can mean many different things to many different people. So assets are all across, what you do with your customers and consumers and the data around it. How do you think about your own assets, whether it's your products and platforms, and whether you think of them from a cost or a revenue perspective. But the way we think about all these assets that we sit on as a modern enterprise, we need to think about a different way of monetizing it, whether it's to aid growth, improve efficiency, or maybe stand up, new business models. The second imperative will really be around how do we think about transforming and improving the way we deliver and the value of what we deliver. And right now, if you really look at, this new global age where we are struggling from a geopolitical perspective, we have a recession, we also have hyperinflation. So how do you think about supply chains, for instance, to make them more real-time and more resilient? How do I think about blurring the lines between different industries using digital transformation? A classic example is healthcare, where in the US, it's not just a payer, a provider, and PBMs or pharmacies being different anymore, but a PBM or a pharmacy is now blending into what a payer or a health insurance company was doing. So how do we blur these industry boundaries to transform and deliver value for consumers and other stakeholders will be important. And the last is really pure product innovation, which in some ways is going back to basics. Every industry has a core product or a service that they're trying to take to market. And how do we innovate on that to find what's coming up next and making it aligned with how consumers want this is going to be important. But how do you now do that quickly, prototype quickly using technology at the core is going to be important. So we believe these three things are important muscles, important capabilities for enterprises to understand, and that will determine where we go from here. And if we move on, we'll see that this is a good segue into what we want to talk about in the second section, which is really where we are as an ecosystem and what's going to come up next in the next 12, 18 months. And with that, we have our second poll, where we'll ask our audience to share their objectives and their leading or the top investment priority that they have as they think about the next 12 to 18 months and going into the next decade. So right from applied artificial intelligence to industry-specific cloud offerings, immersive experience platforms, and a whole array of these exponential technologies, right? A lot of these technologies tend to be slightly different than each other, but all of them are emerging. So quantum, 5G, 6G, confidential computing, and a whole host of them. So I'm interested to see what people respond. But Yugal, Arpita, any thoughts on what's going to come out on top? Yugal, you already have 100% strike rate on predicting. So Arpita, maybe I'll ask this to you.
Actually, I think I got the difficult one. The previous one easier to say all of the above. In fact, actually, I wish we had an all of the above option here as well, because there is so much happening when it comes to digital transformation, exponential technologies. If I talk about 5G, if I talk about metaverse, Web3, there's so much excitement that's happening across the ecosystem. So I think this one is difficult to predict, but I would think go for exponential technologies.
Perfect. Let's see where we land. I think we have a lot of participation on this poll already. So let's maybe now look at what people voted for. So you're not wrong, but I don't think, Arpita, you got it as accurately as Yugal did, because the first thing that came up was applied AI or applied artificial intelligence. And I like the fact that people are thinking about applying AI and not just the building blocks of data and AI, because now it's really about the use cases. So 41% of all respondents voted for that, which was followed closely by industry cloud and exponential technologies. So you're right. And then, immersive experience platforms. And when I look at this, I don't think people voted for immersive experience platforms as the fourth because they're not investing. I think this tells us the pecking order or the priority order in which people are going to do it. For a lot of immersive experience platforms, initial investments have already happened. And now we'll see in a post-metaverse age what that looks like. But this is really good to get a sense of where the audience is at. So if we move on, Yugal, I wonder, we did a whole word cloud around what symbolized digital transformation in the last decade. But now if we now do that for the next decade, and, as an analyst, we're always gazing into our crystal ball. What do you think are the core or the specific issues that digital transformation of the next decade will be symbolized by?
Yeah, and I think I hate to be the Dr. Doom, but unfortunately, it appears I'm picking some of those. So one of my favorite on this word cloud is limited barrier to disruption. I believe the examples of Uber, Airbnb doing what they did has been done to death. But those examples are going to increase. And I think Arpita also spoke about it, that you never know, enterprises never know what is going to hit them going forward, 10 years from now, and both ways. So it is just not about getting disrupted, but it is also about being the disruptor, which again ties back to the point where we started, the complexity. So from a strategy perspective for an enterprise, right, there is no one core competence anymore. There are multiple, and everything needs to come together. From a technology point of view, I believe the decentralization part, where we have, one of the core tenets of Web3 has been spoken a lot. I think it is extremely difficult to do, and the time will tell whether it can be done in the way it is envisioned. But that's an interesting pillar to build enterprise class workloads as well. But I think business networks, we already see in the last 10 years, ecosystem became so important. Every enterprise is even working with their competitors now. The point you made around data and also data cloud, data platforms, sharing is becoming important. Pervasive AI, which we talked about. One thing on this again is the regulation part. And dare I may say that regulations are becoming increasingly more restrictive. And as we see, the world we live in, irrespective of that, as we see most of the countries, and by definition, the companies that work in it want to become more self-reliant. So in a way, the entire global chain or globalization chain of globalization, I won't say it's under threat, but I think it needs a relook, which also ties back to our purpose discussion, which we are going to have later, that you need to become little more than what you were. And Nitish, I know you and Arpita have done a lot of work in on the sustainability side. So if you shared some light on how do you see, yes, last 10 years did what they did. In the next 10, how is this entire purpose going to become important?
Absolutely. And in fact, if I reflect on the last decade, as you mentioned, dealing with this complexity, simplifying was a big central theme. I think one thing for the next decade, in addition to that, will be the evolution of purpose. And, we've been through these ages before, right? From the manual economy to the industrial age to the digital economy. And now we believe it's not just going to be about post-digital or any other term that the industry uses, but truly the evolution of purpose. And we don't mean this in terms of paying lip service to this. We are now, I think, seeing early signs of large enterprises putting the money where their mouth is, which is recognizing that being a purpose-led organization just means being better at their business as well. And it's their customers who are now trying to reward them. Their internal customers or employees want to work for companies who are more purpose-led. So it's a legit way to attract and retain talent. We see partners making decisions on who they want to work with based on their purpose. And we also see society at large rewarding this. So we believe that this broad movement and phenomena to create positive impact for all the communities we serve will be an important aspect and an important selection criteria for digital transformation in the next decade. And what can also happen is a lot of people use the term purpose quite loosely, and we've seen different ages of this before. So Arpita, I wonder, as we move and see how purpose has transformed in the last many years, how have you seen that evolve given your work on sustainability, right? Because you've seen some of these different movements in the last few years.
Sure, Nitish. And I would just like to touch upon one of the aspects that you mentioned. Being purpose driven for organizations is not just about getting your ESG matrix in place. It just does not mean that you have to carry the torch for the latest social cause or leverage your business as a means to a grandiose social goal, or you just need to have highly aspirational net zero targets. While those aspects are becoming important, being purpose driven is fundamentally about operating a business that provides immense value to not just its customers, but all the stakeholders, be it employees, your partners, the vendors, or the communities that you're operating in. Typically, what we have seen is that when businesses think about their growth, they think about the kind of profits they are going to make, the kind of revenue streams they are building. However, creating a purpose driven organization goes beyond that. It is about how do you leverage new processes, new technologies to empower your stakeholders to continue to evolve their roles and their impact on the organization and the community as a whole. The as you would understand, the most valuable asset to any organization will always be its people. Yet, since these metrics are difficult to measure, and these are therefore most likely ignored when you're identifying the KPIs to detect progress. So that's what when you talk about purpose-driven organization, it has to move away from, these organizations are moving away from the tacticals of day to day about what needs to be done. It's more becoming about why we need to invest in the technology. What is the purpose that this investment is going to solve for us? And as we move to the purpose-driven organization, Yugal, would you like to touch upon, are we going to see a very stark difference in the investment themes as we go forward in the next decade of digital transformation?
Yeah, and I wish we do. I mean, going back to the poll that we had, where I think though applied AI came on top, the audience was reasonably divided. I think, which is a good sign as well, that it's fine if as a user or as a consumer, as an enterprise or as a supply side, you haven't figured out what is the key investment bet that we want to take. And I think in general, given the changes that are happening in the society at large, globally, in businesses, it is becoming almost impossible to predict what is going to happen, let's say 2 years from now, forget 1 decade. But that's where I think some of us have to put our brains together, thinking hats together, to just think about, okay, whatever cues we are getting as of today, where are we going to land from, let's say, technology investment in the next 10 years? When we enter 2022, and we do this every year, we ask our clients, okay, what are your key priorities of investment from a technology perspective? And I was hoping that we will get some little bit of cooler examples, right? But we ended up getting examples which might be very stable, to an extent stale. I mean, cloud services have been going on for very, very long. Automation has been going. And the reason is because, as I said, right, it is very difficult to say, okay, we are going to invest this in the next 10 years, because you do not know. Second, things keep on changing. Businesses do not even know what they would look like 3 years down the line or 5 years down the line. But having that perspective is very important. I think one important message for all of us to take away from today is, irrespective of whether it is difficult to predict or project what is going to happen 10 years from now, it is important to know what technologies we need to bet on. Now, that doesn't mean we will end up betting only on 3 or 4 or 4 or 5. We will bet on a bouquet of them, but it is important to at least understand, okay, these are some of the technologies that have potential to become reasonably mature. Some of them are still in ideation. Some of them are something we can invest in. Some of them are we can partner with. So at Everest Group, in our exponential technology research, where we analyze a lot of these technologies, we realize you can make a different version of the diagram that's on the screen. You can have 100 other. So if you go back, you can have 100 other technologies here. So that is besides the point. I think the point being deciding what is critical for your business. Now, what does it mean? Let's say if you are a financial researcher, if you are a financial services company, probably Web 3.0 is more relevant for you than somebody else, right? Having said that, low code, no code is probably important for all of us. Autonomous systems, autonomous vehicles, let's say, right, may be more important for a manufacturing industry than let's say somebody else. So then picking and choosing the right exponential technologies and betting on them. And by betting doesn't mean we have to invest millions and billions of dollars. But what we have to do, and I think there was a question around it during registration as well, is that having all the right stakeholders on the table. So none of these technologies will fall under purview of one business leader, be it CIO, be it Chief Data Officer, Chief Digital Officer, even CEO or Chief Technology Officer. So everybody will have to come in, pitch in, and then try to make a case for, okay, this is what we are going to ideate on. this is what we are going to incubate, and these are some of the technologies we are going to activate based on what are the cues about maturity of these technologies as of today. Second, what is the relevance of these technologies to our business as of today? And then third, what is the ROI, and whether implementation or adoption of these technologies is making our environment simpler or making it more complex. So have that mindset, because I think that kind of innovation is going to be important. And Nitish, if I may invite you for the next slide around, how do you see some of these exponential technologies converging with business platforms, business networks, and what do you see the key drivers behind them? Technologies have been there forever, they will be there forever, but how should enterprises think about these?
Absolutely, Yugal, and I think you made a great point. I think one of the common traps we've seen around digital transformation, and sometimes it is just given the shortening of tenures for a lot of CIOs and C-level executives, is to get some quick wins. And so the trap is really around playing digital buzzword bingo, where you have all of these technologies being thrown at you, and you want to make sure you hit all of them to make a case to your own teams internally as well as externally to make sure you're doing something. But sometimes you forget the end goal, which is what are we building towards, and the fact that the technology itself is a means to an end. It's not the end objective itself. And so we'd recommend using the approach that you outlined. And I think that's a very important thing. As the pace of change just accelerates over the next decade, there will be more technologies, there will be more services, more platforms being thrown at enterprises. So making sure they can retain those objectives and the long-term view or the objective view is going to be important. We always say that clients don't buy technologies, they buy solutions. And that is the view we'd recommend taking. Now, how do we think about then prioritizing even all of these bets? Because emerging technologies or exponential technologies, but just by the definition of the term, means that there's going to be a long list of technologies that will be on your plate. But how do I now prioritize as a leading executive on where do I focus on? So we recommend thinking about three things. First, we recommend a nuanced, a 360-degree approach around innovation. So what are the range of technologies across this innovation life cycle that you will first use for optimization and disruption? And the second is what are some of the new areas that you're incubating as you go along, and what is the innovation cycle across it? So we recommend breaking down innovation into these three buckets, and that often helps make this more real. Otherwise, innovation itself can appear overwhelming. The second thing is, how do I think about operationalizing this innovation and these emerging technologies? So, and that again has three subcomponents, right? From how will we deliver it? So do we have the right teams in place? Do we have the right skill sets? Can we ensure we do this consistently? The second part is the operation cycle, similar to the innovation cycle, which is, what's the stability and the resilience of the technology? How repeatable is it? What stakeholders does it help improve the experience for, productivity, and so on? And then the last aspect is, once we experiment, we do proof of concepts, proof of values, can we truly scale this from an operations perspective? Because, in some cases, you might just use a technology for a specific use case, but a lot of these have to be foundational muscles for the enterprise to be able to build on over the next decade. And not all of these emerging technologies will make that cut. So thinking about innovations and then downstream operations, I think is important. But at the heart of it has to be the outcomes that we are working towards. And effectively, if you think about a large enterprise or any organization for that matter, they effectively have three outcomes. The first outcome or the goal is making sure that they grow. So anything to do with revenue, consumer, stakeholder, employee experience, and so on. The second is making sure that they have sustainable margins or sustainable growth. So how they think about productivity, efficiency, cost of services, and so on. And the third is they want to stay out of trouble. So which is all the stuff around governance, risk, security, and compliance. So making sure we simplify the outcomes you're trying to focus on and then find the technologies to do it will be important. The last thing I'll say on emerging technologies and selection for these technologies is to also take into account network effects. So what I mean is, it's not just about what you do on your own using that technology, whether it's all the building blocks in decentralized finance, as you said, but also what can you do with partners? Because there might be partners, there might be large partners, niche partners, startups that are doing interesting things around this, where you can quickly tap into this. So you don't have to build, you could buy or partner. Having said that, with that prologue, let's talk a little bit about how will the partner ecosystem look like. Now, we believe the partner ecosystem, and when I say partners, it's across software and platforms, it's across consulting or professional services, it's across IT and business process services. We believe there are three sets or three types of partners that you see on the slide here. So first, let's start with digital strategists. So these are the typical consulting firms who help you shape the strategy for business models and how they're shifting. Increasingly, we see a lot of these digital strategists trying to become digital asset builders. So they're trying to get pre-configured assets to help clients build a lot of this. And you can see a lot of these consulting firms now acquiring cloud native capabilities, digital engineering players in a bid to go downstream. So there is a movement towards the middle, which is being an asset builder. On the second set of partners you see are digital asset builders, which are generally big tech product and platforms, as well as digital engineering providers. We believe these categories are starting to encroach on each other, while we also believe some of these digital asset builders, whether it's the Microsofts, Amazons, Googles of the world, or the digital engineering players, will also try to become operators, and that's why you see the shift on the right. But we believe the true value for this is going to be around what we're calling the post-digital business operator, which has traditionally comprised a lot of the traditional global as well as specific system integration companies. But we believe the role will change to help optimize, operate, and evolve business platforms that companies and their clients are operating. So they will really have to put this mantle of a business operator on, and they will need new capabilities, whether it's in terms of consulting, whether it's in terms of product or platform building and orchestration, to be able to naturally do that as they scale. So we believe there are interesting tensions, interesting cross movements across these three categories, but the success for the next decade will depend on a lot on the evolution of the third category, which is a post-digital business operator and what that might entail. Now, having said that, let's now get into the home stretch as we move on, and we'll talk a little bit about what are our predictions, and in some ways, I would also say our hope for the next decade. So, Arpita and Yugal, I'll hand it over to you. I think we have some interesting predictions. Again, for everyone watching and listening, this is not meant to be investment advice, so don't hold us accountable, but I'm kidding. We are very confident about them, so we'll talk a little bit more about this. But Arpita and Yugal, over to you as we bring this home.
Sure. Thanks, Nitish. So it's for the audience that we have covered multiple themes in the slides, in the previous slides. We covered some things around what are the learnings from the last decade, what are the observations that we have from the current scale and maturity of digital transformation. And what you see on this slide is about what are the implications and predictions for the next decade of digital transformation. So first and foremost, as we discussed, being purpose-led will become a critical differentiator for organizations in order to create a loyal customer base, in order to attract the right employees, in order to create a positive impact on the community. It's about building the right purpose-led organization, having purpose at the core of your digital transformation that is going to enhance organizations' growth potential. Next, what we want to emphasize on is about the uncertainty and unpredictability of the era that we currently live in. I think pandemic was a wake-up call for everybody over the world. Globally, the enterprises had to quickly adapt to the changing, uncertain environment. And we expect this to continue. It's not just about the pandemic. Even if you talk about the global conditions, if you just talk about Ukraine-Russia war, you'll have to quickly refigure out. You have to quickly figure out how do you create a resilient supply chain in order to have the right resources in place to deliver services and products to the customers. So the unfamiliarity and unpredictability of the current era, we expect it to continue, and enterprises need to have this highlighted in their digital transformation to make themselves, to empower themselves to deliver in these unpredictable environments. I think the third point is again around complexity, and it would be great if you again re-emphasize on that point, because I think that has been a key theme in the
absolutely. And I think, before going to third, this the unfamiliarity and the unpredictable context is very important. And this is applicable both for buy side as well as supply. So as I said earlier, every company, every country is trying to become more self-reliant. That is impacting the way it works with different countries. We are increasingly seeing the term friendly sourcing getting a lot more traction in the market than near shoring or near sourcing or offshore sourcing. And the reason being, countries and by extension companies are going to work with partners they trust and they are very comfortable with. Second, given the fact that the technology is changing so fast and newer technologies, newer platform, newer thinking keeps on emerging every now and then, anybody will become apprehensive about their future. So when you take a Fortune 500, Global 2000 enterprise spread across the globe, so many different moving parts, the regulations are different, which are becoming stricter by the day. Technology is getting, in the thick of the things. There's a lot of, if I may say so, controversy that are associated with it now. Businesses are trying to do things they have never done before. They are trying to enter markets, enter segments which they have never done before. The boundaries between industries have blurred. So net of it, so much of, uh, so many things are happening for which there is no past benchmark. And because there is no benchmark, it will make and it is making all type of companies, be it buyer of technology or provider, very apprehensive. Having said that, this is not going to change. I think things are going to be this way. Things are going to continue to transform. Uh, Businesses will get disrupted from areas which they have never thought about. And when they drive their digital transformation now in the next decade, they will have simplicity as one of the important building blocks. So what has happened in a typical enterprise is that probably the consumption of technology has become easier, right? You have low code, no code, you can quickly make simple application and then consume. You have DevOps services, SRE, you have automation making your developers like little um, easy compared to what it was. But then building all of those systems is becoming more complex. We have seen what has happened in cloud computing. So the promise was of simplicity, that you have a utility out there. It is not working that way. People are struggling to find value out of their cloud investments and digital investments. In addition, more technologies are introduced by the provider side, and that will continue to happen. So how an enterprise make its digital transformation simple? By integrating all of this in a cohesive and a coherent way, a harmonized way to drive value. And the trust that they need to have in AI systems. I think we saw how everybody, large part of our audience voted applied AI to be one of the key investment focus. But then unless you have trust in those systems, you aren't going to scale them. And I think the industry is moving fast around that. I think the development in that area has been faster than probably it was predicted. So I am hopeful that the trust element will become even stronger going forward. And in the next decade, of course, we already saw the value of ecosystem even in the last 10 years when digital transformation accelerated. But in the next decade, the value of ecosystem is not just going to be for that ecosystem. How do you multiply value for everyone who is part of that ecosystem and beyond the entire purpose agenda? You as a firm are not just you as a firm, you are part of an ecosystem. How do you build that ecosystem? How do you cultivate it? And then how do you multiply value for stakeholders that are part of the ecosystem or even are outside it? So I think these five mega themes are going to drive digital transformation and by extension technology investments within enterprises. And both the buy side, the supply side, and the investor side, governance side, has to be have to be up for it. That is pretty much it.
Perfect. Thanks, Yugal. And I know we want to quickly get to some Q&A, but because we've spoken a lot about, what does success in the next decade look like, we have an exciting opportunity for attendees of the webinar. So we have been, working on this digital transformation success model for a number of years now, and we've been refining this as we think about the next decade. So whether you're an enterprise making decisions around outsourcing, technology selection, partner selection, or a provider who's providing services or software and platforms around this, there is something that this digital transformation success model can help you as you think about the next decade. So there will be shortly a link circulated to register your interest for the strategy refresh. So you'll get a short document from our teams which talks about what are the underlying components that, based on what you see on the slide right now, but also what you should be doing around these topics to make sure that you emerge as a winner over the next decade on these topics. So feel free to register an interest for this, and then the teams will follow up and we'll share more after the webinar. Now, having said that, let's get to what's always the most exciting part of these discussions for me personally, and I know for Yugal and Arpita as well, which is the Q&A. We've had some come through privately today, and then we had a whole host of pre-submitted questions. In all fairness, I don't think we'll be able to cover all the questions that have come through in the last 10 minutes of the call today, but we're more than happy to follow up, and the teams will share an update offline. So let me start with the first one, and Yugal, let me hand it over to you, and then we, Arpita and I can share our perspectives, but we'll do 3 or 4. So this is a very interesting one, which is really around what changes do you see in the sourcing model and the governance model as a result of this digital transformation over the last decade, but also what's going to happen, right? So how we source, how large enterprises source for this and govern these relationships, how do you think that will change?
So I think one is, and what is already happening is, the slide that you also talked about, how enterprises think about some of their service partners, strategists, builder, operators. And yes, there is no clear boundaries. The way enterprises are blurring their industries, so are providers. So the work of sourcing team is becoming more complex in terms of which type of partners, and that includes technology companies and service companies, do we need to work with. And in fact, I think next week we have one more webinar around where we are showing our Rubik cube of engaging with service providers, because the way things are going, large system integrators or large consulting companies are trying to do everything, but buyers know where they need to engage with which company versus not. They want, so from a sourcing perspective, understanding the core competence and the real value that a service provider or a provider, technology or service company, brings to the table will become even more important. I see, despite the fact that we spoke about sprawl of partners, I think that is going to continue. But that sprawl will be very different than the sprawl that happened last 10 years. There will be a lot of specialists that get introduced, both on technology as well as services side. From a governance perspective, enterprises will use different models to govern different of these. And I do see, at least from a provider side, providers will try to uplift the value they can create for their enterprise clients. And that will also push the sourcing team on buy side, how they need to engage with them. If I have to ask you and Arpita around some of these things, especially this question, which is in everybody's mind, given the fact there are so many technologies, and we saw in the last 10 years, multiple business execs got involved. How do you see in the next 10 years the role of there are so many C-level execs getting involved in digital transformation? Do you see that continuing? Do you see that change? Do you see something else?
Yeah, so Yugal, that's a great point. I think it goes back to the stakeholders you were mentioning in one of the earlier pages around, who will be influential in making these decisions happen. I see two things happening. One, I see a lot more centralization of digital transformation from a stakeholder perspective than before. So in the early days, what we saw was there were a lot of these fragmented initiatives across the enterprise. So the natural tendency was to let's create a new chief digital officer or a chief analytics officer aside from the CIO or the CTO. And what a lot of these enterprises realize is if you're doing these small pilots, small experiments, while that's great, unless there's a defined roadmap, defined accountability, defined budgets for the chief digital officer, they mostly end up doing keynotes, which was a challenge for a lot of these enterprises. So because the reporting, the governance, and the budgets for them were not exactly clear. So we've seen this move where a lot of people are now centralizing this. So under the CTO or sometimes a combined CTO and a CIO, so we see the role of a CIO and a CTO becoming even more important. The big change for them is they have their core spend, which is sometimes under pressure on managed services, but they're getting additional spend from business. So they need to talk the language of business to be able to orchestrate that spend. I think the second thing we'll see is, while we're seeing a lot of centralization, people are now thinking about building foundational capabilities than just doing pilots. So they're now taking a more pragmatic view, saying that, to your point around simplification, that there are so many of these technologies being hurled at us. What are the 3 or 4 foundational capabilities, whether it's applied AI, whether it's, around the experience economy that I want to build to be able to succeed? So we'll see a centralization, but I think we'll also see more investment in foundational capabilities, which are orchestrated by CTO and CIO organizations, and more pragmatism in the kind of C-level roles around digital transformation. Let's talk a little bit about, this is this interesting question around the fact, do we think there's going to be a time period before some of these emerging technologies become viable solutions? And Arpita, let me get you to respond. Maybe this is the last question we'll be able to take today. We'll try and squeeze in one more. But as we think about, we spoke about all of these emerging technologies, from blockchain to mixed reality, moving to the metaverse, confidential computing, quantum computing, and a whole host of more such technologies. As Arpita, you think about the time period before this becomes commercially viable, what's your take, and how do you see that happening?
So, Nitish, my view around this question is it also depends on specifically what industry are you operating in and where are you in your digital transformation journey. So when it comes to any emerging technology, we have seen the leaders and we have seen the laggards. So it's not a myth. We are seeing organizations, we are seeing enterprises being able to get value out of their blockchain initiatives. We are seeing the Metas of the world, the Facebooks, the Amazons of the world, taking on the bandwagon of the emerging technologies to transform their operations, to make monetize, to be able to practically monetize these initiatives and build a more collaborative environment within their organization. So I feel it also depends on what is the kind of approach you are taking towards these technologies. As Yugal mentioned in the previous slide, you need to identify, prioritize, and build a strategy to be able to make the best use of these technologies, try fast, fail fast, learn fast, and move on to the next pilot, rather than having a large scale investment at the upfront. What do you think, you will?
Yeah, I mean, that's and what Nitish said, we do not want to give investment advice. So that's $1 million question. Which of these technologies are going to become, critical? And frankly, that's a question we get asked a lot when we work with our clients who engage us to talk about, okay, what is happening, let's say, in quantum computing, for that matter, because the news flow from some of the supply side is immense, and it can create an impression that a lot of these technologies are ready for prime time. Some are not. As you said, blockchain has been around like for a very long time, and with Web3 evolution, I think it will become little more mainstream than it was in the last 10 years. Quantum computing, of course, autonomous systems, I think those are anyways becoming very not commonplace, but you can see them in in your day-to-day life now. So I guess some of these technologies have a head start. Of course, things like low code and all, they are no longer emerging anymore. But net of it, which technology will mature? I think the important question is the other way around. Which of these technologies are relevant in your business context? So technology may be mature or not, you can still evaluate, you can still take a call whether it is relevant to your business, and then work accordingly.
Perfect. And I think, if we squeeze in one more question and we leave in a few minutes for wrap up, I think there's a live question which came in around how we think about low code platforms and as we become more vendor dependent to focus on business dependence and business led, and whether regulations around this and IT outsourcing will change. So I don't think low code itself will change the way we think about IT outsourcing, but I think it speaks to a broader trend, which is the whole focus on citizen developers and the fact that business and non-IT users want to own their own digital transformation pathway. So the ability to make digital transformation more accessible will be an important trend, and that impacts what low code and no code tools are trying to do. That also impacts, how data insights and next best action kind of things are also being requested by more business stakeholders, not just data scientists or the data organization. So I think it's an accelerant. I think it also now changes the stakeholders we serve, going beyond IT to the discussion we've had earlier. So I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. But in the last few slides, you can also see, and as you get this document as a post-session readout, you can check out some of our thinking around these topics. We've referenced this through the webinar, whether it's the metaverse, digital commerce, European or sustainability related insights. So you'll see some interesting post-session reading content here as well. But if you have any questions, you know where the team is, and either of us and our teams will be happy to chat. I want to thank everyone for the time today. Thanks for joining in on a busy day. And if you have any questions, do let us know. Thanks, Sunil. Thanks, Arpita.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.